Here's another way to understand this much debated passage through the lens of what's known as Adam Christology. According to the German scholar Karl Kuschel in his book Born Before All Time, by the 1960s and 70s, Anglo-Saxon exegetes had paid more attention to the basic alternative that in Philippians 2, Christ is not celebrated as a pre-existent heavenly being, but in good Jewish fashion as a human counterpart to Adam. This view was also espoused by the late British professor of New Testament Christology, Dr. James Dunn, and the noted Catholic scholar Raymond Brown. Paul also compares Christ with Adam in Romans 5, 1 Corinthians 15. In fact, we can ask, is not Adam the first original man here replaced and surpassed by Jesus as the definite, ultimately valid man? To answer the question, let's first look at the context of Philippians 2. We see that Paul starts with an appeal to all Christians to adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Some translations render the Greek here as a past tense in verse 6 that Christ Jesus was in the form of God, which feeds into the incarnation myth that says Paul was actually referring in this whole passage to Jesus before his virgin birth. But it's clear from both the context and in particular verse 5 that Paul had the human historical person of the Messiah in mind, not some pre-existent being or, quote, God the Son. Instead, it is the human historical Jesus that all Christians are supposed to model their behavior and mindset after, according to Paul. Dr. James Dunn, Christology in the Making, says that as 1 Corinthians 15:45 and following verses insists, the temporal order is clear. Adam first, Christ second, Christ is last Adam, Adam precedes Christ. Adam was not a copy of a pre-existent Christ, but a type of him who was to come, as Paul says in the letter to Romans, chapter 5, verse 14. In point of fact, in earliest Christian Adam theology, Christ always presupposes Adam. Christ's Odyssey presupposes the plight of Adam's offspring. With this view in mind, the contrast with the first human, Adam, can easily be seen throughout Philippians 2. So first, Jesus is said to have existed in the form of God. That is, Jesus looked, sounded, acted like God during his ministry. Likewise, we see that Adam was originally made after the image of God, which means without sin, with the authority to rule creation, etc. In the New Testament, the words form and image are used as near synonyms. In Colossians 1, Colossians 3, Philippians 2, 2 Corinthians 4, and other places throughout the letters of Paul. Thayer's lexicon on the Greek word morphe defines it as the form by which a person or thing strikes the vision, the external appearance. Children are said to reflect the morphe of their parents. So we see how the word form could be a reference to Christ being the ultimate image of God, just like Adam was before the fall, the visible expression of God's invisible glory, as Paul says in Colossians 1:15. Note that the LXX, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, translates the Hebrew word for image both as morphe in Daniel 3, verse 19, and icon or icon in Genesis 1, verses 26 and 27. Jesus is also said to have refused to grasp at equality with God, that is, being God-like, in Philippians 2:6. Adam did grasp at being like God according to Genesis chapters 1 to 3, and would have even reached out to take of the tree of life according to Genesis 3:22. Paul says Jesus emptied himself, that is, he did not use his God-given authority to rule yet. In contrast, Adam was originally made to rule creation, but desired more. That is, the knowledge of good and evil. Paul says Jesus was made in the likeness of man. That is, he was like any other mortal human person. In contrast, Adam desired to be godlike, that is, immortal. Paul says Jesus humbled himself, that is, he remained an obedient son. In contrast, Adam was not humble at all. Adam did not remain obedient. Paul says Jesus was super exalted by God, even above the highest angels in heaven. In contrast, Adam was brought low, literally back down to earth, to the dust of the ground. Again, James Dunn says in his book Christology in the Making, the Christ of Philippians 2, verses 6 to 11, therefore, is the man who undid Adam's wrong. Confronted with the same choice, he rejected Adam's sin, but nevertheless freely followed Adam's course as fallen man to the bitter end of death. Wherefore God bestowed on him the status not simply that Adam lost, but the status which Adam was intended to come to, God's final prototype, the last Adam. So the moral of this story can be summed up as follows. Paul's main point is to warn those Christians not thinking Christ-like to think and act like Christ, lest they end up like the first Adam. As Jesus says in Matthew 23, verse 12, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.